Can I help you? What's up everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to do a video that is potentially a little bit controversial, and I say this in a very nuanced way because a lot of my subscribers, or perhaps people who are watching right now, have come to my channel originally from my Fujifilm X Pro 2 video, and there's been a ton of outpouring of support about just that camera in general, what a great decision I've made to purchase that camera, and just the love of Fuji and Fuji's system in general. There are actually a handful of reasons that I don't want to say prefer my Olympus system, but a few features that are benefits to the Olympus system that the Fuji system is either lacking on or just doesn't do as well. That being said, I have been loving my X Pro 2 so far. I've been loving the Fuji lenses, but I'm gonna have a whole different video on that, and so today's video is gonna be focused more on Olympus specifically. So I've come up with 7 reasons pretty much right off the bat in terms of the difference between Olympus and Fujifilm, at least in terms of my OMD EM1 Mark II versus the X Pro 2. So I will also say that this video is geared more towards people who are either amateur photographers, hobbyists. Okay. So the first is probably one of the main things that people look at when choosing a camera or a camera system in general, and that's the cost. Now, that was pretty much one of the very first noticeable differences that I found in the two systems. Olympus cameras are actually quite inexpensive compared to Fujifilm, as well as like Canon and Nikon full frames and the higher end cameras that you can get. In terms of cost, I actually purchased my Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, which is one of Olympus's nicer, higher end cameras. It's definitely not their top tier. They have the EM1X, and as well as that, they have the EM1 Mark III, which is now out. So I purchased the EM1 Mark II a few months ago, and I purchased it secondhand, and it ran me $600. But when I purchased the X Pro 2, I actually purchased it, again, they have the X Pro 3 out, and I bought it secondhand. I purchased it for $900, and that was pretty much the best deal that I could find. When you think about the price that I paid for my EM1 Mark II, which is a great camera, compared to Fujifilm cameras, these are the cameras that you would not be able to purchase given the $600 price cutoffs. You will not be able to buy the X100T or newer. The X-T30 won't be able to purchase an X-T3, X-T4. X Pro 2 is out of the budget, along with the X Pro 3 and XH1. And these are all secondhand prices. Another thing that I noticed is like lens prices. So with Olympus lenses, I'm getting primes that open up to like 1.7, 1.8 for less than $200, which on the Fuji system is just not gonna happen. So the second reason is the raw file size. And this is for a number of reasons, and if you are more technical and more knowledgeable, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this in the comments. Part of the reason is because the Olympus is actually less megapixels, so that's going to contribute to the raw file size, in addition to the fact that it is a micro four thirds crop sensor, which is a 2x crop versus an APS-C crop. So there's going to be more data on the Fujifilm systems, and you pay for that in the size of the raw files. However, that does not mean the Olympus quality is bad, and I want to say this again from the perspective of either an amateur or even someone who is shooting semi-professionally. You've got clients, you've got people paying for your photos. Most people don't like blow up the images and print them out in these huge dimensions, and that's where you're going to start noticing that quality difference. If you're just posting things on Instagram or on social media, or just keeping it as your like digital web files, Olympus camera quality is still phenomenal. When I think about the raw file size, it's really not necessary for me to have the Fujifilm raw files. They're almost double the size of Olympus raw files, and for me, who has a very like base model Mac Mini, storage is not completely abundant. I have to constantly add SSDs if I'm constantly shooting in Fuji raw files, which is another reason why I tend to shoot raw on Olympus and shoot JPEG on my X Pro 2. The third thing is IBIS. So my $300-ish EM10 Mark II, which again was the previous Olympus camera that I owned, had IBIS built in, and pretty much all, if not all, then most Olympus cameras automatically have the 5-axis image stabilization built in. That's something that I really took for granted. That's something that I kind of always just knew was there, but in the back of my head, didn't really think about it, didn't really have to think about it. Now, in terms of the Fuji system, to my knowledge, the only cameras that have IBIS built in are the X-T4, the XS10, and the XH1. When you think about those 3 cameras compared to the entire X series lineup, that's such a small portion of it, and those are going to be your significantly more expensive cameras. You can buy optical image stabilized lenses, but those are only 2-axis image stabilization versus 5 on bodies when they're built in. It's something that you can get used to once you're aware of it, but it's just the kind of idea behind the fact that so many, if not all, Olympus cameras just come with IBIS and are so much less expensive than Fujifilm cameras. The fourth is the LCD. So this is something that, again, I didn't really realize how uncommon it was, but both Olympus cameras that I've owned, including my EM10, very intro level, already touch screen, and it already had like a tilting LCD. The Olympus EM1, one of the reasons why I got it was because it has a fully articulating screen to it, again, also touchscreen. But one thing that I've noticed is that's actually not that common. A lot of Fuji cameras, if anything, only have the tilt screen and not the fully articulating screen, except the X-T4, maybe the XS10 as well, although those are both fairly new cameras and both fairly expensive cameras. So number 5 is the size. Part of the reason why Olympus cameras can be much smaller is because of the crop sensor. This is just something that is known. When you have a crop sensor, it allows it to be smaller than a less crop sensor. So when you're going from like micro four thirds to APS-C, or especially compared to a full frame camera, which are going to be your larger mirrorless cameras. That being said, Olympus cameras are definitely lighter. They're smaller. Fujifilm, it's funny because I watched a ton of Fujifilm videos about how light or small or easy to travel with some of their cameras are, including the X Pro 2, the X100 series. But when I actually compare it to my Olympus system is actually probably smaller. So that's just another factor to keep in mind if you aren't necessarily professional. All right, so number 6 is actually where I prefer the micro four thirds crop. And that is because your lenses are automatically doubled in terms of focal length, and they just become longer. So my 45mm lens for my Olympus system actually becomes a 90 effective focal length, and as someone who loves like longer lenses, a tighter crop, I actually really prefer that feature to it. I personally find that more enjoyable to photograph. So I definitely appreciate the crop in that sense, that it just automatically lengthens your lens. And lastly, number 7 is the battery life. So this is something that I will talk about in my X Pro 2 video, but the battery life is something that, again, I took for granted on my Olympus systems. Now on my EM1, the battery life is phenomenal on this camera. I could be on a shoot for quite a few hours and not even go through the full charge on one battery, whereas my Fujifilm camera, when I took my X Pro 2 out on a hike, I probably went through 2 batteries in about 3 hours. And I think all of these various reasons, combined with reason number 1, which is the cost, makes Olympus cameras very, very competitive to your Fujifilms, your Sonys, and even your Canons, but I think they're often overlooked because of either not a lot of popularity, at least in the US, around Olympus, or the fact that it is a micro four thirds crop, so it's seen as less than or just not as good quality, even though the images are still incredible. But it's just certain reasons where people have hyped up other camera companies and other types of cameras like the APS-C sensors and the full frame sensors, where a lot of these less expensive but still highly capable cameras tend to just get overlooked or put down, or for whatever reason they're just not respected. And I think part of the reason why I wanted to do this video is because I spent years being super in love with my Olympus cameras, and while I have gone obviously the Fuji route a little bit now and dipped my toes in that water, the Olympus camera is still no less capable. And I think while I get comments of people saying X Pro 2 is a very capable camera, you can use it on your like more official shoots, the Olympus is just as good, if not better in certain ways to have in terms of some of these features. So if you are someone who is either looking into a new camera or looking for your first mirrorless camera, highly recommend looking into Olympus. Not knocking Fuji or any other camera company by any means. I am just trying to bring up a few tips of things you may want to consider when considering a new camera, including also the color science, but I didn't add that in there because I really like the colors on Fuji too, so I can't really compare and choose one over the other, but Olympus colors are wonderful as well. That being said, I hope this video helped someone. I hope it opened your eyes to the Olympus system if you're not familiar with it. If you guys have any comments, any tidbits to add, please feel free to comment it down below. I know I've gotten a few comments of people who are both Olympus and Fuji shooters, so it's definitely nice having both. It's also a place of luxury, I would say, to be able to have both systems, so I also want to bring that up. Definitely very happy and lucky to be able to have both systems and to be able to talk about both of them in this video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you're interested in Olympus content, Fuji content, or film photography content. I'm definitely trying to work on keeping some variety in this channel. With film, it's a little bit harder because there's a turnaround time between when I actually film/shoot something versus when the photos actually get developed. So still working on that and figuring out a good system for that. Like I said, if you enjoyed this, please let me know down below, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you all in my next video.